Hey TikTok family, I thought I'd do a quick live session with you today. So it's 12:30 Eastern time on Sunday, April 10, and just going to keep rolling like we did last time. There's a lot of questions other authors might have or readers might have that they'd like to ask an author, and a lot of people don't like to get on live and ask. So I figured I'll take some of those popular interview questions or questions from readers over the past, and I'll answer them now. So let's get right to it. What do the words writer's block mean to you? Okay, so I don't suffer from writer's block. I'm a pretty prolific writer. And when somebody says they have writer's block, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. They can mean different things when they say they have writer's block, but typically it means they had an idea for a story, they got it so far, and they don't know where to go next with the story. They're stuck, and they can't write, and there's no good ideas coming, that sort of thing, okay? So that's typically writer's block. Now, the biggest cure for writer's block is to outline your story first. So you have, the murder happen. In a murder mystery, it's like the murder happens, and at the end, the bad guy goes to jail, and in between, some things happen. So to avoid writer's block, what you do is, before you start writing, you got this great idea. It's like, oh, what if blah, 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 blah. What if this great idea? And you just, before you think too much about it, you start writing, which is great. And then 10,000 words in or 20,000 words in, the adrenaline's gone, the excitement's gone, and the work begins, and you kind of run out of steam. So that's really where people say writer's block come from. I'm blocked. I can't think of anything to write. Now, I mentioned, I don't suffer from writer's block. I'm pretty prolific. A couple different things you can do to get rid of writer's block, but the first thing is writer's block means you didn't plan your story out very well, okay? If you have an outline and you know first this, then this, then this, then this, and this, there's no block. You know what to write next. Maybe you don't want to write it. Well, if you don't want to write it because it's not an interesting scene, then it's not going to be interesting to read either. Maybe you should leave it out or really, really, really condense it. So to avoid writer's block, you can make an outline. Another thing to avoid writer's block is, or let's suppose you have a tricky scene that you can't figure out how to write, or a problem you've created for your characters, you can't figure out how to write it. Then go write something else for a while. Go write a short story. If you write horror, write a short romantic scene that you don't maybe ever intend to use, although certainly there are plenty of romance scenes, and every theme has, usually some sort of romantic subplot. If you're just joining us now, I'm just answering typical questions we get asked. If you have a question, feel free to ask it. Glad you're here. So one way to get out of writer's block, like I said, to have an outline. Another way is to go write something else, get your mind off it. And whether you write something else or not, go get your mind off it. A lot of times, when you can relax, the answers to the problems will come to you. Here's another good question. This happens to everybody who's an author. How do you deal with a negative review? Well, the first thing to remember is not every book is for every reader. Let's suppose that you love romance, okay? And let's suppose I write a murder mystery. Well, you may not like my book then if somehow it wandered into your hands, but you heard it was good, and so you picked it up and you read it, but it's just not for you. Nothing wrong with reading the book and saying this wasn't for me. Here's what that does. Let's suppose I got a reader over here who loved my book, has read all my books and loved all my books, and a reader over here who, this is the first book they read and they didn't like it. Okay. Over here, the algorithms are going to say, when they post a review, the person who liked my book posts a review, other people who like what that person liked will be steered towards my books. Over here, the person who didn't like my book, other people who like what they like and don't like what they don't like, will be steered away from my books. That helps me. The other thing to remember is your book is going to get, we're just talking about author topics. I'm an author. If you have questions, you can ask some questions, whether you're an author or a reader or whatever. If you ever want to ask an author question, this is your chance. And I'm answering some questions about how to deal with a negative book review. So the first thing is, it's not the end of the world. It doesn't mean that the book isn't any good. If you get 500 good reviews and one bad review, like 500 5-star reviews and one 1-star review, the 1-star review still stings. You just have to take it in perspective. Now, if you first launch your book and you get 10 reviews that are all 1 stars and no 5-star reviews, you need to take that as maybe I didn't do a very good job. Okay, that's legit. And if you get a bunch of positive reviews, let's say 10 positive reviews and 1 bad review, 10-to-1 ratio. One still stings, but you just got to shrug it off. You got to stick back and say, you felt like you wrote a good story. You put it out there to people. They either liked it or they didn't like it. Fine. Most people are going to like it. And if it's out there long enough, it's going to find its audience. So you have to do some marketing, and you have to steer it to the right people, which means you can get a negative review by steering it to the wrong people. Are there therapeutic benefits to modeling a character after someone you know? Let's suppose you had some boss that you really hated, and you make a character after that boss that you really hated. Nothing wrong with that, I guess. I wouldn't probably name the character the exact name of the boss. That's probably not a good idea. But just for lawsuit reasons and karma and other things, be the bigger person. But there were probably things that boss did. If you didn't like somebody, let's assume first of all that you're a normal, well balanced person. If you don't like somebody, there's probably a reason. There's probably things they did that were bad to you or wrong. Okay. Then of course there's nothing wrong with having a character who does things that are bad or wrong to maybe the main character who is trying to do good things, right? So is there a therapeutic benefit? I'm sure there are therapeutic benefits. I know I've had some horrible bosses. My good bosses I can name like this. My bad bosses I can also name like this. And I'm sure the bad bosses thought I was a bad employee, but I've had bosses encourage me to lie, cheat, not so much steal, but if you're cheating to get a bonus for them, that's stealing. And I'm sure they thought I was a terrible employee. I thought they were a crappy boss. So we're both right. Because if you're trying to encourage me to do things that are wrong, shame on me if I did them. And shame on you for asking me to. And the sooner you get out of an organization like that, the better you are. I write little book like on Wattpad, but I'm stuck. I have 5 chapters and I'm not sure if it's good. Well, that's exactly what I was talking about. What does this say? Dudes that buy decorative books, though. I don't know what decorative books are. Oh, maybe these up here, decorative books. They're decorative, but they're the classics like Mark Twain and Bronte and Jules Verne. Those are great to have around for inspiration, and I read them, so they're not exactly decorative. Anyhow, so you write books on Wattpad or whatever, it doesn't matter where you write them, and you get 5 chapters and you're stuck. Yeah. So what you want to do there is maybe take a break and just think to yourself, where did I see this going? I had this great idea. Like say you're creating the Harry Potter story, and you're like, oh, I got this great idea about a wizard boy. He doesn't know he's a wizard. He goes to wizard school. Okay, that sounds interesting. Maybe it doesn't sound interesting, but J.K. Rowling made it interesting, and she was not the first one to invent magic and wizards and all that other kind of stuff. So what excited you about it? First, you might want to go back and start from your first page as a reader, not as the person who wrote it, and read it and see what's interesting. And as you're reading, pretend to be a reader and think, what would be something fun that would happen next? What's something that somebody would never expect to happen next? What's something that would really, really, really put these characters in danger? Create some scenes. I was writing a book, The Gamma Sequence, and I had an idea. I was on the treadmill one day, pumping it out. And I was like, man, I would love, I think I was watching TV because I got a TV in front of my treadmill. And there was like a tropical island, like a cruise vacation commercial or whatever, and they showed these people walking through this waterfall, and they showed a cliff diver diving off a cliff. No, I'm sorry. They weren't walking up a waterfall. It was like in Jamaica where it's like water. It's kind of like a waterfall, but it's like water going over these rocks, and the people were climbing up them. But it wasn't steep. And I saw this cliff diver guy dive off from like somewhere else the cruise goes. And I was like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if I had to have a character run through the jungle being chased, or running through the jungle to catch somebody or whatever, and they come to the end, I guess they're being chased, and it's like it's a waterfall, they got to jump. I was like, wow, that would be fun to see. It would be scary to do if I had to do it, right? So I thought that'd be fun. So I just jot that down. Waterfall, I have to jump into a waterfall or jump off a cliff or whatever. So you start throwing some of these ideas. Maybe you can use them in the current story you're on, maybe not. And then, maybe you actually just write that scene. So now you're not really blocked. You're just kind of stuck on the story you were trying to finish. Okay. And so what I'm going to tell you is, Winston Churchill said, when you're going through hell, keep going. So sit down, force yourself to write a little bit of that story every day, thinking about where did I see this going? And then once it's done, you can always go back and revise it. You can't edit anything that's not put on the page. So you definitely want to do that. It's a habit like anything else. If you sit down to write and you think about some things you would want to see in a story, or similar stories, how did they progress? If you're 5 chapters in, let's say maybe there's 20 or 30 chapters, you're still at the beginning, so introduce a new character who's going to get in the way of your main character, or introduce a bad guy whose goals are in direct conflict with your main characters. have them meet somehow, or have somebody your main character was relying on for guidance or assistance or information, have them be like a double cross, like they decide, yeah, the thing the main character is after is really good, maybe I'll knife the main character in the back, and maybe I'll pursue that thing. What's the most difficult part of your writing process? Somebody said, I never get this quote right, but it's like, they said writing is something that's very difficult. Maybe it was like, writing is something that's very easy for everyone except writers. It's like the most difficult part of the writing process. Probably, for me personally, the most difficult part is marketing. So that's not really part of the writing process, but it is, right? So if you set that aside, what's the hardest part? In most points in a book where you're 2/3 of the way through, you're kind of trying to, you set up all these different story scenarios, different plot lines, and they all got to converge and finish quickly and without being boring. And I had a technical person tell me 2/3 of the way through any project is where the tough slog begins. That's where everybody's, trying to get it to complete. So I imagine that's not too unusual. So the most difficult part for most people is outlining it and figuring out an ending, and then a rational way to get there. And of course, you don't have to end the story the way you when you start writing the story. Romeo and Juliet are going to both die in the end, and maybe halfway through you say, "What if they live? That might be good too." Then write that ending. There's nothing wrong with that. How long have you been writing? It's a tricky answer. I used to write comic books for my older brother. So when I was like a little kid, I wrote, and later on I wrote different things for different. I wrote we had a grade school paper. I wrote for that. I wrote for the high school paper. I wrote stories when I was in college just for fun. I was in a rock band, so I wrote songs, which is basically writing poetry, but it still kind of has to make sense. And even with comic books, when I was a kid, there's comic book. In order to have it be interesting, it's got to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. So nothing wrong with that. So probably a lot, but as far as seriously writing, maybe the last 5 years, really, really taking it seriously. What advice would you give a writer who's working on their first book? The first thing I would tell you is, you got some great idea that's making you want to write. Congratulations, great. Something like 85 or 90% of American adults want to write a book and never do. So the fact that if you start writing your book, you're already in the 10%. And of those people who start writing a book, most never finish. So finish it, and you'll also be in the even smaller percent. Of those who finish it, most never let anybody else ever read it. So even if it's just a critique group, put it out there for other eyeballs to see it, and you'll be even in the more rare air. And of those, most never get published. So obviously pursue publishing of your work. Most of you are better writers than you think you are. Most of the people, I used to do presentations at Florida Writers Association conferences, and over in Orlando, and I'd be speaking to a group of 100 people or whatever or more. And I used to do sales presentations. I'd be in front of a couple of hundred people, a lot of those people who were in the Writers Association sessions were wanting to learn, how do you write better dialogue? How do you plot out something good? How do you this, that, and the other? And so they were all there for different pieces of advice, and different presenters are talking on different topics. And so it's like a bunch of different things you have to learn to do well. But when I would look at story samples from people, or when I was in critique groups looking at new writers, most of them, the vast majority of them, wrote pretty well. They wrote better than they thought they did. Probably the flip side of the coin was there were some really, really bad writers, and they had no idea how bad they were. And I was not in a position to say, you're really terrible at this, but I would encourage them to work on their craft. An elephant may never be able to be a ballerina, but it doesn't mean the elephant can't learn to dance or enjoy moving more than the elephant enjoys. All right, so if you got any questions you'd like to ask me, feel free. I'll be reading them here. I'm also answering questions that are typically asked, and we're going to go about another 15 minutes, longer if you have more questions, but I realize it's Sunday at your house too, so if you can't join us, that's fine. I'm getting a sip of my Crystal Light Peach Mango Green Tea, caffeine-free. Crystal Light Company, again, if you want to sponsor me, I'm open to that. Meanwhile, I'm giving you free commercials. So for a writer writing on your first, working on your first book, just stay with it, man. Outline if you can, push through till you finish it. Doesn't matter how long it is. I mean, you know, most word processing applications, computers and whatnot, software, they have a word count. So, you know, if you're going to write 60,000 words, that's a lot. When you write 2,000 or 3,000, you're like, whew, I'm beat, 60,000, I'll never get there. View it the other way, like, I was able to do 3,000. Well, in another week or two, I'll complete another 3,000. Just keep, you know, baby steps, and you'll get there. And reread what you wrote, because if you enjoy the story you're writing, it'll be enjoyable to do reading. Any advice on pacing? Yeah, here's what you do about pacing. Okay, this is more like mechanics. So I will. So I write in Word. So I'll create a new document, okay, like a fresh blank page, when I start writing a new chapter, okay? And then I'll, like say chapter 1, and I'll write whatever belongs in chapter 1, then I'll save it. And when I write chapter 2, I create a new document. So in that new document, I'm looking at my word count, okay? The reason why I'm getting to that in a second. So I'll save chapter 2 separately from chapter 1. And then when I'm done with chapter 2, done revising it, whatever, I'll take it and I'll copy paste it with chapter 1. So now it's chapter 1 and 2, and the legal stuff at the top and all that kind of crap, table of contents and you know, a bunch of stuff. Here's my other books and that kind of thing. Excuse me. So over here I have my main document, which is the story so far. Over here I have my individual chapters, and I just save them into a used folder, like a subfolder. All the chapters I already wrote and are done that have been combined in the main one, I file them away. In case lightning strikes and I lose the current one, I'm not too far behind, okay? Now, the reason why I do that is because that way, when I'm writing chapter 2, I can look down at the lower left-hand corner and it's going to tell me my word count. The goal word count I want, I'm kind of verbose. I kind of write a lot of words. So as I'm writing, I mentally know whatever this point is of this chapter, I want to wrap it up around 3,000 words. If it takes 5,000, it takes 5,000. If I can make the point in 1,000 or 750, I don't care. I don't mind a 750 word chapter. So that's part 1, right? If you're trying to make a point, a plot point, and you decide that's a chapter, or this scene, I'm going to go rob a bank. We've been planning the bank robbery. The scene opens up. We go driving up to the bank, and we all run into the bank, okay? Maybe that scene is going to be robbing the bank. So the scene might start with the car driving up. The bank robbery is going to happen, and the scene might end, more or less, with us running out the door, or maybe we get trapped in there, whatever. Okay, so the bank robbery scene. I'm going to give myself about 3,000 words, kind of mentally pegged at it, 3,000. I'm going to write whatever I have to write. I'll revise it to flesh out areas that need more detail or scale back places where it was a little boring. And then, so I've kind of self-governed myself to get that scene done in 3,000 words, okay? Then when I'm done with it, because it's in its own file, I can look and see, okay, I was, 2950 or 3,200. I'm like, okay, I'm about where I wanted to be. Now, I'm going to create a spreadsheet. You're going to hate this. I'm going to create a spreadsheet, and each chapter I'm going to log how many words long it was. So chapter 1 was 3,000, chapter 2 was 3,000, or whatever it is, right? And then it's going to give me a running total. I also have the running total in each one of those separate documents, and I've got it in the main document. But when I'm done, now I'm all done with my book, because I don't want to talk about things that I know aren't interesting, and I want to get to the point, and I want to make every scene, I want to make the scene, I want to write the scene feeling like there's 10 things that are trying to grab my reader's attention away from me. TikTok, and dinner's ready, and the car needs new brakes, and the kids got to go to bed. All those things are going to happen while somebody's reading my book. So I've got to keep them glued to the page. So I have to have something interesting and compelling on every single page. That doesn't mean somebody gets killed on every page. It just means something interesting, okay? If there's nothing interesting on that page, you got to think about, why did I write that? And sometimes it's setting up things for later on. Okay, so now I'm all done with my book. I set out with a goal of make my point per chapter 3,000 words or less. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less, that's fine. When I sit down the next day, I read through what I wrote the prior day, and hopefully it's maintaining my interest, okay? Then I save it all, and now I got my huge document. It's 80,000 words or whatever. I take about a week off. I do other things. I clear my head. I write some short stories, but I don't work at all on this bank robbery book that I'm writing. When I sit down, this goes back to pace. I didn't forget you, JC. When I sit down to read that thing, the whole manuscript, I've taken a week off. If you can take more time off, that's great, but here's where the big benefit comes in. You don't look at that thing for a week. If you can go 2 weeks, that's even better. When you sit down to read it, you're much more like a reader than the person who wrote it. You're going to see mistakes. You're going to realize some things are really well. You wrote some things a lot better than you were expecting. And 3 different highlighting colors I want you to use, okay? This is on your completed manuscript. You haven't sent it out to anybody else, and it's you reviewing you, okay? You're not looking for typos. You're not doing anything. You're just a reader, okay? As you start reading, at the end of each paragraph or a couple paragraphs, you highlight what you read in green. If there was nothing wrong with that, you liked it, it was engaging, it did what you wanted it to do. In yellow, if you thought, there were parts in here that maybe were a little slow, might need to be revised, might need to be trimmed, and anything you want to skip or skim over, you highlight in red. And you don't do any of it right now. You just go through the whole manuscript. When you're done, you're going to have a visual representation of the things you thought were great, the things you thought were needed to be looked at, and things you didn't think were good. Of the things that were green, you want to read those with a sharp eye. Any commas, any mistakes, any typos, maybe 90% of that stuff stays. Maybe it gets expanded a little bit to make sure it's delivering the point you had in your head is on the page. That's what taking a week off does for you. I might write, Mary had a little limb, okay? I knew I meant lamb, so my brain, when I read it, it's going to say to me, Mary had a little lamb. The typo is limb. Somebody who hasn't read this before is going to say, what the heck? Although honestly, with Mary had a little limb, they might still read it as lamb. But if you let beta readers read it, somebody's going to catch that and say, is this supposed to be limb or lamb? And you'll be like, oh crap, yeah. And I've done videos of this where I've had beta readers send me a comment, the phrase or whatever that I did wrong is highlighted, and the rewritten one, they fixed it. They said it says limb, it should say lamb. And I'm staring at it, and I'm staring at it in the manuscript, and I don't see it. I don't see the error. I don't see the error. And I have to go word by word, letter by letter sometimes. Oh, limb, it's lamb. Okay, got it. So that's how close you are with your material. That's why it's hard for you to edit yourself. But now, step back, and you look at most of your manuscript is green. A lot of its chunks are yellow, chunks are red. Anything that's green, assume you're going to keep 90% of it. If there's a way to make it better, make it better. But right now, for a first pass, leave it alone. Anything in yellow, you got to revise it. You got to trim it, maybe by 20 or 30%. Look at why is it not interesting? What was it? What could be done better about it? And if you can't figure it out, send it to an author friend who can, who fresh pair of eyes. Anything that's in red, you basically want to get rid of with an asterisk, right? Maybe 90% of that needs to go. If you didn't want to read it, the reader isn't going to want to read it either. If you don't find it interesting, neither will they. And so you've got to say, okay, I had a chapter where a beta reader said, you don't need this whole chapter. Basically, they went, there was a car wreck, they went from the scene of the wreck to the hospital. Get rid of that scene. You wasted a whole chapter. I had another one where I had a guy waiting for a train in a train station when the trains were on strike. And I was like, you got to show how bored he is. And it's like, yeah, you're boring the reader too. And one of my beta readers was like, scrap that whole chapter. You're like, scrap the chapter, you know? For those red passages, maybe it's a paragraph, maybe it's a page, you felt on the first pass that information was necessary. But now you as a reader, you got to step back and say, is that information necessary? Can I get rid of it? And if there's information in there that's necessary, like I needed to show the guy was stuck in the train station for all day because he was having a fight with his wife and he was in a foreign country and it was important to the overall plot where he was all day. But I could say that in like 2 sentences, kind of like I just did. So rather than have a page or a chapter of that, cut it down to like the bare bones, the absolute, summarize it. Read through it and say, what am I trying to say here? Harry discovers the spider in the basement. Okay, then do that, write that, okay? With the one where they were going from the car wreck to the hospital, it's like, just put them at the hospital and have them reference the fact that, wow, you're a fast driver. Well, then obviously they were in their car together, right? So there's a good trick for that. So recapping on that one. Set a limit for how long it will take you to make the point of that chapter. Revise it the next day. Wait a week or so after you're done with your whole manuscript. Highlight it red, yellow, and green with an intention of bring out the best stuff and leave the bad stuff behind. And then, when you've done that and you made those changes, send it out to beta readers who like the genre you're writing in, and listen to what they have to tell you. And beta readers are tricky because not every beta reader does things the same way. But you listen with a grain of salt to the feedback that's coming in. Because let's say I'm your beta reader. I'm not. Let's say I was. In chapter 2, I ask a question. This doesn't seem to make sense. Why is this here? Maybe it's there to set up something that happens in chapter 5. So it's got to stay. But me going from chapter 1 to chapter 2, I'm questioning why it's there. And I'm just asking, why is this here? It doesn't seem to fit, or whatever I might say, right? But you can't take it out because it sets up something from chapter 5. All right? Hope that helps. How about repetition of words? Do you have a special way to check that? Yeah, we talked about this a little bit the other day. What you do is, first of all, the very fact that you're asking means you probably are aware you overuse certain words. Okay, great. Here's what you do. Make a list of the words that you know you overuse. Any words you think you overuse. There's free software to do this stuff, but all I do is I type the words at the top of my manuscript. Like say I use the word smile too much and look too much, okay? So the first thing you do is you type those at the top of your manuscript to remind you that you overuse those words, all right? Then you double click on look and you do a search. And look appears 50,000 times in, in a 65,000 word manuscript. It's like, all right, well, I'm using that one too much. So a couple things you do. First, come up with a list of synonyms for look. Peer, eyed, glanced, got it? Inspected. And then every time look comes up, keep the first occurrence of look. The next time it comes up, replace it with one of the next synonym in the list, and just kind of go through that way. With reading the paragraph or whatever to make sure does inspected belong here where I said look. Okay? If you have look 500 times in 50,000 words, that's not a big deal. But if there are 10 of them in the same 2 paragraphs, then that's too much. So you got to look for, if it's been 3 pages since the word look, it's probably okay. You use look. And if you just replace them all, if you replace every look with a glance, then you just have too many glances instead of looks. It's all glancing. Now you've replaced one crutch word with another crutch word. So do it that way. And then once you've replaced look 500 times in a manuscript, your fingers will be electrified with an electric shock every time you type LOO. You'll be aware not to do it, and you'll automatically start to use different words. Encourage, that's from TikTok. I sent them on PDF edit and sent back. You can help highlight too. Me, no, I don't do any more editing. I got out of that a long time ago. I helped hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people, and they helped me. And here's why you want to join a critique group, because finding ways for other people to improve sharpens your eye for your own stuff. So it's a great thing to do. Let's see here. Excellent. Well, thank you very much. Repetition of words in books drives me mad. Yeah. So here's why though, okay? Here's why you don't want to do it. Your goal as the author is to keep that reader glued to the page. If you do something boring, that invites them to put the book down and not pick it back up again. That's kind of the opposite of your goal. Repetition is close to boring. So the more repetition you do of words, the less interesting and more boring your book becomes, the more somebody is likely to put it down. And I will tell you this too. You might overuse certain words. A reader's not probably going to write a review that says, gosh, every 5th word was the word look. It was boring for that reason. They may not be able to articulate why they didn't like or enjoy your book as much as somebody else's. They may not be able to articulate that, but it adds up. And so it's like what I call little micro errors. So you overuse a few words and you don't do a few things otherwise that you could have done. And at the end of the book, they're like, it wasn't as polished as somebody else, some of the other things I've read, but they can't articulate why. You need to be on top of that. And then, like I said, have a list of your crutch words. I have a list of mine. In the old days, I used to send out a beta reader copy with the list of words typed right at the top of it. It said Dan's crutch words, and here they all are. And I have a separate document is, if I overuse the word look, I have over here, I have a list of crutch words that are not crutch words, a list of synonyms to replace that crutch word to help me do that. Because it's not rocket science. Go to your online thesaurus and find 5 or 6 words. And, some of them aren't going to fit. A lot of people use walk. Walk is overused a lot. Look is overused a lot. Other things, You may have some unique ones. So just come up with a bunch of synonyms. You don't even have to invent them. They're online, and use those, rotate those through. So I was going to keep this session short, but I'm happy to take any other questions you have. We'll go a couple more minutes if you got some. Here's a good one that I like. What to you are the most important elements of good writing? We kind of covered this, but I'll answer this question, right? What are the important elements of good writing? The reviews tell you when they say, I couldn't put it down, I missed my bus stop because I was so engrossed in the story. You've done it where you look at the clock and it's like 10 o'clock and you're like, okay, I'll read one more chapter. And next thing you know, you look up and it's 2 in the morning and you read half the book because you get so immersed. So my goal as an author is to immerse the reader in the story so that time stops having meaning and they just keep reading, okay? That's the most important thing to achieve. How do you achieve that? Interesting characters that people are going to want to spend time with, and a fast-moving plot. It almost doesn't matter what the plot is if I'm enjoying spending time with these characters, okay? So that is one thing. And another thing is make your point as quickly as possible. Start with your opening scene. Start with maybe the most interesting thing in that scene. Here's a really good one for authors. In each chapter, I forget where I learned this. I think it was from a TV show, maybe like from the TV show Lost, I think, when they were talking to the people who wrote that. They said, in each chapter, answer a question and ask another question that we have to turn the page to get the answer to. Yeah. So if you're answering a question in that chapter, what we tend to do as authors is, here's a problem, and then by the time the chapter's ended, we've solved that problem. It's like, take a breath. And the reader puts the book down and doesn't pick it back up again. If you instead, it's like a little cliffhanger at the end of each chapter, never at the end of a book, okay? I'm not big on cliffhangers at the end of books. But at the end of each chapter, if you've asked, or somewhere in that chapter, you've asked a question that the reader needs to turn the page to get the answer to, that really will be much more compelling. A lot of people will keep reading. I'm going to scroll down and this is going to mess this up. What is the best thing you can do to entertain? Well, basically, if you're in your, let me bring my computer back up. One sec. Entertainment is different to different audiences, okay? So a romance audience might want to be entertained by having Romeo and Juliet want to get together. Their parents don't want them to get together. They don't want to do something against their parents, but they pine away for each other and they decide to do it. And the tragedy is we're learning as they go that they're planning these horrible ends for themselves because they can't live without each other. And then that dread sets in. So it's like, you know what's coming, and you see, she wakes up and he's killed himself. And so she takes his dagger and kills herself. And then he wakes up and he's like, oh no, right? So entertainment is delivering what the audience wanted, like exceeding their expectations for it though. So if you're going to be a comedian, you gotta, make them laugh and then top it with a little extra punch. If you're going to be a romance, maybe put a lot of obstacles in the way of the two characters getting together. A lot of big romances they don't get together, right? Romeo and Juliet, Titanic, love story, So the best thing you can do to entertain is to know, what does that reader want? What do romance readers want? They don't just want the happily ever after on day one. They want the lovers to, on chapter one rather, they want the lovers to have to work for it. And the satisfaction comes from overcoming the obstacles. And that's basically true in every story. Think of Indiana Jones, Raiders of the Lost Ark. What's he want? He's trying to achieve getting the Ark back, and the Nazis keep moving it around. And at the end, he gets it, and finally it's all solved, and then of course the government screws up. But the satisfaction was the journey, the entertaining journey, all the things he had to go through to get it. And that's, Vonnegut said, a good story is people get into trouble and they get out of it again. That's the element of a story, right? So it's like, here's my character, here's where my story starts, this is what my character wants, and these are the obstacles in between they have to go through to get it. And that's the entertainment value, the journey, usually. So a quick moving plot with characters that people are going to want to spend time with. And that's the main thing, right? The goal is achieved at the end. It's like you're always dangling it out there, but the time spent with the characters is really where the fun is. So be writing interesting characters. That's what they want. Another question, what comes first for you, the plot or the characters, and why? All right, well, obviously if you're writing a series, you're going to kind of reuse some of the same characters, but it's always fun to introduce somebody new who throws a wrench into things or adds a little spice to the soup. And depending on what you write, if you're writing a romance, you kind of have an idea of this person's over here, they meet this person, they overcome some obstacles, and they get together. So the plot, in a nutshell, is kind of maybe four or five points. So within that, though, like what comes first? Probably the plot, like, and then I'll create characters that fit with that plot. So for example, I was challenged to write a medical thriller. I wrote the Gamma Sequence. And I was kicking around ideas. I'm like, what kind of medical thrillers did I like? You know, the old Quincy Medical Examiner TV show, and or like Grey's Anatomy, and different medical thrillers. What would be interesting there? And I thought genetics, an illegal genetics lab that maybe was doing illegal human harvesting and maybe some other bad things. So now I got that broad stroke of, all right, I'll set it around this. Now what would be compelling? Oh, they're doing really horrible things, and somebody inside figures out they're doing these horrible things, and so they leave the company and they want to tell the world the company's doing these horrible things, but these things are so horrible, the company's making so much money that they will kill this person if this person says what they know. All right? So now you got a dilemma. You got a, what do you call him, a whistleblower who leaves the company, who wants to tell the truth about what's going on. And it's like, well, how would everybody not know? Well, there's a thing called compartmentalization where you work on a part of a project for a while. You don't know what happened before. You don't know what's coming after. Your section is only this, and you're not allowed to talk to anybody else about what your project is, because genetics is big business, right? But this is true of lots of proprietary companies making, the secret recipe to Mrs. Fields cookies. They don't want you to know what it is, because then you can make it and you're a competitor, okay? So the compartmental aspect, and so you just set it up to where it's feasible, where the employees weren't allowed to talk to each other, and therefore they didn't know what the end result was. Like over in Indonesia is where they were doing all the harvesting and all the illegal stuff, and over here in the United States they had the lab where it looked like things were a certain way that they weren't. And as somebody found out, wait, they're doing all these things, now she becomes the whistleblower. Now her life is threatened. And what makes it more real is there were two or three other people who got killed that all looked like accidents. This one was in Arizona, he drowned in his pool. That one's in California and was in a single car wreck. This one drove his car off the road in Florida or whatever and died. And she's like, they were all worked for the same company in the past, and they all were slated, their names were all on a list that I have, and they're killing them, and now you got a story, right? So that's how you evolve it. You just sit there, and that's where you spend a day or two before you start writing. It's like, oh, what about this? What about that? And the feasibility, like you write them all down, you look at them the next day, all your ideas, and you're like, that doesn't make any sense, but this one's good and that one's good. I can write a story here. And then what would happen? Oh, they're going to chase her around, and who's she going to go to for help, and how is she not going to get found out? Maybe she's got money stashed around in all these different airports and the lockers and stuff because she knew this day might come. She sniffed it out, and she made some plans, and she uses burner phones, and she's bought fake IDs, and she's all set up, and the person she's asking for help thinks she's completely paranoid and crazy and wants her to go to the cops, doesn't want anything to do with it. And then he goes home and his apartment's been burned, and it's like, oh crap, maybe something is up here. So there you go. You start stacking the what do you call it? Not the odds, the stakes. Stack up the stakes, get higher and higher and higher. It's like the detective's like, I don't want anything to do with you. Then he goes home and he finds out he's at risk just because he was talking to her. Now he has to work with her because his life's at risk, and you're off to the races. Okay, JC, got another question here for me. What drew you personally to writing mystery and thrillers? Excellent question. Money. So I was writing all kinds of different stuff. I wrote some comedies, I wrote some family humor, and people would read them and say, wow, you're a really good author, you're a really good writer, you're really easy to immerse yourself in your stories. Have you ever thought about writing this, that, and the other? And I'll be honest, I decided I'm going to write one book in each different genre. And I said, because I wanted to try my hand, because I had seen a lot of stories have subplots that are from other genres, right? So I always use the example of Star Wars. The original Star Wars is, was saving the galaxy from Darth Vader, but there's the romance angle between, Han Solo and Leia and Luke and, that bit. So in order for that to work, you have to be skilled at some romance. There's a mystery involved. How are they going to get what they got to get? There's adventure involved. So you got to be good at all those different genres. So I thought, I'll write a story in each different genre. And what I used to joke around was, I said, I'm going to try every different genre until I find one I'm good at. Excuse me. So in a good adventure story, there was some mystery, there was a little bit of romance, there was this, that, and people were like, hey, there's a little something for everybody in the way you write. And so, like I said earlier, a friend challenged me to write a medical thriller, and I was like, yeah, I don't know if that's for me. And the advice I got was, it's not too different from what you're doing, it's just a little different framework. You can bring in these fun characters, these interesting characters, these characters with these different problems, and you can have that dynamic between those characters in this setting. And I was like, okay. And then, like I said, I thought about that. Well, once you write a medical thriller, it's a mystery or a thriller set in a medical setting. So how hard is it to take that exact same situation and take it out of the medical setting and just make it cops and robbers? And so I thought, okay, I'll do that. So the first mystery thriller I wrote was Double Blind, where that's police, two detectives who are chasing a serial killer in Tampa, and the killer figures out who they are and decides to take them out, and they figure out that he's trying to take them out. And so that was fun. The one I wrote before that was the Gamma Sequence. And when I wrote the Gamma Sequence, Gamma's right there, I think. That was like a 5 or 6 book series, ended up being. And I wrote the first one. I wrote the first Gamma Sequence. I was done. When it was over, I'm like, done. I had a great little ending, a boom, But it was kind of popular, and people were like, oh, you should write another one. What happens next? I'm like, nothing, because they solved the mystery, right? And so the more I thought about it, I took a little time, and I was like, well, yeah, there could be. But I decided I'm not going to write a second book unless it can be as good as or better than the first book. And the second book in that series, Rogue Elements, is really, really good, and it introduces a character called Jaden Trin, who ends up writing through the entire rest of the series. And in the third book, we introduced the characters of Constantine, a little kid, a genetic prodigy, created by Dr. Hauser in the genetics lab, and her keeper, Keeper 27, who doesn't even have a name because they genetically created so many people. So she's just Keeper 27. And those two characters were a lot of fun, and they end up staying with the series through the end. So that was when I got into it, I had so much fun doing it, and I loved toying with the readers, like saying, okay, you think this, and now boom, this is going to happen. Like in Double Blind, people said every time I thought I knew who the murderer was, that person would die, and obviously they're not the murderer then, so that was fun. What drew you personally to writing mysteries and thrillers? Oh, sorry, I answered that one. I'll scroll back through. So how do you develop your plot and your characters? I like to think about who would you want to spend time with, and that's what I put in my stories. Like, who would I want to spend time with? So you might have a very serious type, and you might have somebody who's a little more jokes around a little more. I'm certainly that way. You might have a boss that is a boss over these two characters who's very, very friendly, very much on their side, very much like a great boss. And you might also have, remember in Harry Potter, it's like every Harry Potter book, the potions person switches. I think it's potions. They got a new, it was dark arts maybe. Okay, it doesn't matter, whatever it is. So there's all these different subjects they have to take, and this one teacher is different in every book, and So I thought, okay, what if my characters start out with this boss they like, in the second book they get a boss they don't like, in the third book that boss gets fired, and they got somebody else now who's kind of different. They can't figure this guy out. And I thought that might be something, not like they needed to have so many different bosses, but it was an element to entertain, to think about, something for me to consider, let's say, not entertain, something for me to consider, because in the first book, they loved their boss, and that boss worked with them, and that boss is up from promotion, so they're getting a new boss, and the new boss is a complete jerk. They hate him, and he's all for himself and everything. And that might work for a couple of books, and then that guy kind of gets shoved to the side, or because they're working on this special task force, they don't have to deal with that boss, and maybe they're dealing with some FBI guy who's nice or a jerk or is trying to hit on the main, the Carly character, one of the two detectives. All kinds of different ideas there. So that could be a lot of different fun things. So I try to come up with characters that I would want to spend time with, and I think readers would want to spend time with, and that they're going to enjoy. If they're going to spend 2 hours reading, or 4 hours reading, or 6 hours reading, to somebody they're going to want to spend time with, and have a lot of little personal anecdotes, like with Carly and Sergio in the Double Line series. They're best friends. So he goes over to her house and he wants to borrow her jet ski, and he likes playing with her two kids. And he's a bachelor guy. So his life, when he leaves there, he's all about, okay, where's my next date? He's on the prowl kind of thing. And then they have some other friends, especially in Double Blind. They have some other friends that they meet and interact with who may or may not come back for other visits or cameos or important subplots in other books. And I had a character in there who was really joked around a lot. His name was Tyree, and he was like, the one guy goes, "Hey, Tyree, come over here so they can have their talk." He goes, "Yeah, but if I come over here, I won't be able to hear what they're saying. I want to listen," right? He's like trying to eavesdrop. So if we got any more questions, I'll take them. Otherwise, we'll wrap it up here in the next minute or two. For all of you who dropped in and hung around, great having you. Certainly appreciate you spending some of your Sunday with me. And if there's no other questions, we'll go ahead and wrap it up there. So I enjoyed it. Thanks a lot. If you think of a question later that you didn't get a chance to ask, just drop it on one of my other videos. Just throw in a comment. Hey, I wanted to ask you about such and such, and I'll write it down for next time. Also, I'm going to download this and upload it onto YouTube. So if you want to pop over there and see something that you missed here, or if you're just joining me at the end and you're like, gosh, well, I wanted to know about such and such, it'll be on YouTube. Dan Alatorre, Authorsphere. Pop over there and check it out. And we'll do another one of these again real soon. Thanks a lot, everybody. Thank you very much for joining me. Talk to you soon.